Welcome to our first video lecture on plants. So this is just going to be a quick review of biodiversity, and then we're going to do an overview of plant structure. Our objectives for today, we're going to review cell theory because plants are made of cells. We're going to review classification because plants are classified. We're going to describe some of the big plant structures and functions of those structures, focusing on the three big organs, the roots, the stems, and the leaves. We're going to compare and contrast monocots and dicots. We're going to define meristem. We're going to wrap up with a little review of plant cell structure. So cell theory, remember that cell theory states that number one, all living things are composed of cells. Number two, cells are the basic building blocks of all living things. And number three, cells come from pre-existing cells. You can read all the other words if you want to, but that's the major gist of cell theory. Remember that there are some exceptions to cell theory, and here is one example. So we don't use this word cenocytic, instead we use aseptic. So we call these guys aseptic hyphy. The hyphae are the not roots, but they kind of look like roots, but they're not roots, structures of fungus, and the aseptic hyphae of fungus are exceptions to cell theory because they are multinucleate. So some fungus have septic hyphae, they have these divisions, and so each of these little compartments has one nucleus. These aseptic hyphae, they don't have those divisions, and so these cells are actually multinucleate. Striated muscle or skeletal muscle is similar in us humans. Giant cells that are multinucleate. And then our last exception are the giant algae, and they are exceptions because they're giant and cells are usually really small. Okay, so let's review some biodiversity and classification. So Carolus Linnaeus, he was the guy who started classifying stuff. He didn't get very far because he didn't know a whole lot because he lived a really long time ago. But now we have built upon his classification system, and we have lots of ways to classify things. The biggest of the divisions that we're going to talk about are domains. And so there are three domains: bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. We belong to eukarya. Once we are kind of focused on one domain, we can start to classify things more specifically, and we can talk about kingdoms. We're in kingdom Animalia, and then we can start classifying organisms within each kingdom into phylum, and then class, and then order, and then family, and then genus, species. Genus, species is special. It is how we describe organisms scientifically with this idea of binomial nomenclature, which literally means two naming systems. And when we talk about genus and species of an organism, we're going to capitalize the genus, lowercase species name, and all of it should be in italics. We humans can also be classified into domains and kingdoms all the way on down. Do try to find a way to memorize domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Sometimes we use dumb kids playing cards on freeways get squished. That's one way to remember these. Pause for a moment and see if you can remember our classification. We humans, what is our domain? What's our kingdom? What's our phylum? All the way on down. And when you're ready, here we go. So our domain is eukarya. We are eukaryotes because we have nuclei. We're kingdom Animalia, phylum Chordata, class Mammalia. We make milk. We're in the order primates. Our family is Hominidae, and our genus and species is Homo sapiens. Remember, again, Homo sapiens, this is our scientific name, binomial nomenclature. Capitalize the genus, lowercase species, and the whole thing is italicized. Plants can also be classified. They are in the kingdom Plantae. They are photosynthetic, and they have cell walls composed of cellulose. Remember that cellulose is a polymer of beta-glucose molecules. 1,4 glycosidic bonding only, so it's straight chain. We, in IB, we don't talk a whole lot about chlorophyta, but these are algae, non-vascular plants, where we usually start talking about the different phylum that we need to have memorized. Is it Bryophyte? So Bryophytes are mosses. They are non-vascular, which means they do not have tubes that carry water and nutrients around their bodies. Mosses have to stay pretty small because each one of those little leaves is going to have to take care of all of its own water. There is no transportation system to get water to the leaves. They are non-vascular, no tubes for transportation. The rest of these guys, these are all vascular plants. They do have those tubes that are going to transport water and nutrients around the plants. The first of these guys that we're going to talk about is Phyllosynophyta, or ferns. These guys are cool. They do have vascular tissue, or that transportation system. The next guy we're going to talk about are the Coniferophytes. They also are vascular, but now they're cool because they have seeds too. And then the most complex, the most evolutionarily advanced of our plants are the Angiosperms. These guys are cool because they are vascular, and they have seeds, and they have flowers and fruits that help to take care of those seeds. An interesting guy are the Magnolia. We're not really sure. Like right now we call Magnolia Angiosperms, but they might be like a cool missing link between conifers and angiosperms because they're a little bit pine tree-like, but they're also a little bit flowery. So they're interesting. All right, a little bit of anatomy vocabulary because we're going to talk about anatomy of plants. Atoms are the smallest pieces of elements that retain the properties of the element. Organelles are composed of atoms and molecules. Organelles are very small pieces of cells that carry out specific functions within the cells. Examples are ribosomes or cell walls, nuclei. These are all considered organelles. Cells are groups of organelles that carry out, again, another function. If I have a group of cells carrying out the same function, I have a tissue. Examples of tissue would be like a piece of liver. When I put all of the different tissues of the liver together, we have that whole organ, the liver. An organ system would be like the digestive system or the cardiovascular system, where we have lots of organs working together to carry out some functions. When I have groups of organ systems working together, we have actual whole organisms now. All the organisms of the same species living in the same area at the same time is a population. And the species is all of those organisms that are genetically related and can reproduce to have fertile offspring. All right, so let's talk about some of those plant organs. Remember that organs are groups of tissues working together to carry out some functions. In plants, our major organs are the roots, the stems, and the leaves. The job of roots is to anchor the plants into the ground or wherever it is, also to absorb water and minerals, and then sometimes those roots work as storage organs also. Stems are mostly going to be about support and transport, but sometimes we also store stuff in stems. And then our leaves, the leaves' job mostly is going to be to capture light and carry out photosynthesis. But there are lots of amazing exceptions to these functions. So these guys right here, these are mangroves. These things that are above ground that you're like, well, maybe those are stems. Those are roots. Mangroves live in very salty areas. And so sometimes they just put their roots up above the water line just a little bit. Kind of cool. Onions. Onions, you might be thinking this is root or stem. They're leaves. So onions are actually modified leaves. Super cool. Here is our cactus, right? You might be thinking, oh, look at that lovely leaf of a cactus. Nope, that's stem. The leaves are actually the modified spines. The spines are modified leaves. One of the cool things about cactus, because they live in super, super sunny places, is that they don't have to work super hard to collect sunlight. The stems can collect enough sunlight, and so the stems carry out photosynthesis instead of the leaves. The leaves are spines to help protect the water in the stems. Here are some potatoes. Potatoes are tubers. You might be thinking these are modified roots. Nope. They're stems. They're underground stems that carry out storage. Crazy sauce, right? Potatoes are stems. Carrots, they are actually roots. That makes a little bit more sense. And then poinsettias, sometimes we buy these in the winter holidays, and you're like, oh, look at the pretty flower petals. Those are actually leaves. These guys here, these are the flowers. So focusing on our angiosperms, those plants that make flowers, we can further categorize them into monocots and dicots. Monocot stands for monocotyledonous plants. They only have one seed leaf, only one cotyledon, only one chunk of endosperm, and when they start to sprout, they only have this one little leaf. Our dicots, di stands for two, they have two of those seed leaves. And here you can see in our dicot seed, we have 1, 2 cotyledons. These are chunks of food that are going to feed that growing plant. And it also has 1, 2 little baby leaves. And here they are when it sprouts, 1, 2 baby leaves in that dicot. There are more differences between monocots and dicots beyond just those seed leaves. They also will have different leaf patterns. So our monocots will have parallel leaf venation. Looking at this picture over here, you can see how the veins in the leaf are all parallel. That's different from the net-like leaf venation in dicots. The veins branch out like this. They make nets. Flower parts in monocots come in groups of threes, groups or multiples of 3. So there's 1, 2, 3 petals on that flower. That's different from our dicots, where the flower parts come in multiples of 4s or 5s. This guy has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so it's a dicot. Vascular bundles in the stem. So vascular bundles, these are the tubes of the vessels of that transportation system that carries around water, minerals, and nutrients. So the vascular bundles are throughout the whole stems of a monocot. So if I took a monocot and I cut its stem and I'm looking at a cross-section of the stem, we're going to have those bundles of vascular tissue, those transportation tubes, are all over the place, whereas in our dicots, they form a more organized ring around the stem. So we're going to have those vascular bundles will be like this. And then last but not least, our roots are a little bit different. So our monocots will have fibrous roots. So they're just like kind of all over the place. And then our dicots have what we call a taproot. So there's one main root, and then there are little branches off of that main root. So we're going to focus in here a little bit on just stems. So stem structure. Again, here's our monocot, here's our dicot. Monocots have those vascular bundles all over the place. Dicots have those vascular bundles in a ring around the stem. So different parts of stems. We have the epidermis. The epidermis is on the outside. It's going to function as protection. It's basically the skin of the stem. And I'm focusing more on the dicot structure. So we have some cortex, which is going to support the plant. Cortex here. That cortex sometimes will store minerals, water, some sucrose. We have xylem and phloem. These are the vascular tissues. These guys are those tubes, those vessels that carry things around. Xylem is going to carry around the water and the minerals. And then the phloem is going to transport organic molecules like sugars, glucose. We'll talk about source and sink when we get to our specific lessons on the xylem and on the phloem. Cambium, I spelled this wrong. There's no R in there. Cambium is our rapidly dividing cells, our lateral meristem. This is where we have lots of mitosis going on. And then last but not least, in the center of our dicot stem, we have pith, which is again more storage and support. This is cork. For a lot of plants, this is what cork looks like. Right, so now we're going to flip over to leaves. We're going to focus on the structure of the leaf. Super cool thing about the very top of the leaf, it is covered by this waxy cuticle. It is a layer on the surface that is waterproof, and so it prevents dehydration. So that cuticle is just a waxy layer on top of the upper surface of the leaf. Just under that, we have another skin layer. Epidermis is going to be right under that waxy cuticle. Under the epidermis, we have the Palisade Mesophyll. So Palisade Mesophyll is here. Palisade Mesophyll is one of IB's favorite plant cells. This is where the great majority of photosynthesis is going to occur in most plants. Under the Palisade Mesophyll, we have some Spongy Mesophyll. Spongy Mesophyll is more spread out. This is kind of like the lung tissue of plants, if plants had lungs. There's lots of space between the spongy mesophyll cells for gases to move around. So that gas exchange that needs to happen, carbon dioxide in to make photosynthesis, oxygen coming out from photolysis, all of this space in between the spongy mesophyll cells allows for that gas exchange to happen. Again, we have xylem and phloem. Xylem and phloem, because we do need to transport water and sugars around the leaves. And then one last super cool thing on the bottom epidermal layer of the leaves, we have stomata and guard cells. So again, we have lots of gas exchange happening here in the spongy mesophyll. We need to get gases in and out, and that happens through these spaces called stomata. The stomata can be opened and closed by these guard cells. So guard cells can swell closed, or they can open back up, and the gases can get in and out. Again, carbon dioxide is going to diffuse in so that we can carry out Calvin cycle. Oxygen will diffuse out because it is a waste product from photolysis. And here's another view of a cross-section of a leaf. Consider pausing the video, go ahead and label these guys either on paper in your head along with their functions, and then restart the video to check your answers. I hope you're ready to check your answers, because here we go. This top layer is called the cuticle. It is a layer of wax that helps to prevent dehydration, water loss. Just under that is the upper epidermis. The job of the epidermis is protection of the leaf. Just under that we have the Palisade Mesophyll. The Palisade Mesophyll cells, you can see, are chock full of chloroplasts. So many chloroplasts. The great majority of photosynthesis happens in the Palisade Mesophyll. Under the Palisade Mesophyll, we have the Spongy Mesophyll. Still some chloroplasts. We've got some photosynthesis going on, but not nearly as much as in the Palisade Mesophyll. The cool thing about the Spongy Mesophyll is it's got these air pockets. It's kind of like the alveolus, or the lungs of the plant. Lots of space for gas exchange. CO2 and oxygen gas can roll around in here, so that it can get to all of those Palisade Mesophyll and Spongy Mesophyll cells. Here is our vascular bundle. So vascular bundle, the bundle of vessels, vascular tissue. This is xylem that transports water and minerals. This is phloem that transports sugar, organic molecules, basically the sap of the plant. We also have a lower epidermis that protects the bottom of the leaf. And then super cool, we have these two cells that we call guard cells. The guard cells can swell open, unswell closed, which is going to change the size of this space. This space is called a stoma. If I have many stoma, there are stomata. Be careful. Stoma is the opening on the bottom of a leaf. The stroma is the juicy inside of the chloroplast that's inside the chloroplast but outside of the thylakoid membranes. This allows for gas exchange. We need CO2 to get in to carry out Calvin cycle. Oxygen gas will diffuse out because of its production during photolysis. Little bit more vocabulary here. Meristem. Meristem is basically the stem cells of the plant. We have rapidly dividing cells, lots and lots of mitosis going on here. Two kinds of meristem tissue. We have apical and lateral. Apical meristem is at the shoot and the root. It is going to elongate the plant. So when the plant grows up, it's because of the apical meristem here. When the roots grow down, it's the apical meristem in the root. And then we also have lateral or cambium, secondary growth, where it's causing the stem to get wider, thicker. Good. All right. Generalized plant cells. Let's review super fast. We've got some cell wall. Of course, that's composed of cellulose, which is beta glucose. Just inside the cell wall, we have cell membrane. Job of the cell wall is to protect the cell, help it maintain its structure. Cell membrane's job is to control what gets in and out. We have some rough ER and some smooth ER. The rough ER's job is to hold on to some ribosomes. We're going to make some proteins. Proteins made by ribosomes on the rough ER are going to be excreted out of the cell. We also have those free ribosomes that are not bound to the ER. These guys are going to make proteins that are going to stay inside the cell. Smooth ER has no ribosomes. Its job is to make more lipids. We've got the nucleus. It's going to hold on to the DNA. We've got the nucleolus. Its job is to make more ribosomes. There are mitochondria that create lots of ATP for the cell, and then chloroplasts is where we're going to carry out photosynthesis. We're going to make some glucose. We have that large central vacuole. The large central vacuole's job is to store water and some minerals. We've got some mineral crystals and some other mineral crystals floating around in here. You don't need to know those names. Just know that there's water and minerals in those large central vacuoles. We've also got some starch granules. We've got Golgi. The job of the Golgi is to take those proteins that are made by the rough ER, bundle them into vesicles, and then those vesicles can be excreted out of the cell. And I think we got it all. Pause the video. Go ahead and label this guy, and my friends, we are almost done. All right, hopefully you pause the video, you have a label, you're back to check your work. We've got a cell wall composed of cellulose. Just inside the cell wall is going to be the cell membrane, or the plasma membrane. This is all about homeostasis, maintaining what is inside and outside of the cell. We've got some chloroplasts here where we have, you can see our thylakoid pancakes and lots of lamella. Remember, these guys are double membraned. We think they used to be bacteria, endosymbiosis, carrying out photosynthesis for us. Here we've got giant nucleus, definitely in interphase because I see chromatin, not chromosomes. Nucleolus is here. The job of the nucleolus is to carry out production of ribosomes. Got some little mitochondria floating around in here. They're going to make lots of ATP for us. And then our large central vacuole. And objectives accomplished. We reviewed cell theory, 1, 2, 3 things. All living things are composed of cells. Cells are the building blocks of all living things, and cells come from pre-existing cells. We reviewed classification. Remember that binomial nomenclature, genus, species is where we how we name things in science. We described plant structure and function. Roots are about anchorage, but sometimes other stuff. Stems are for support, but also sometimes other stuff. Leaves are for photosynthesis. Most of the time, there are exceptions. We compared and contrasted monocots and dicots. Monocots have 1 cotyledon, dicots have 2. We defined meristem, the stem cells of the plant. There are 2 kinds, apical and lateral. Apical is going to be root and shoot elongation of the plant. Lateral, or cambium, is going to thicken the stem. And then we reviewed plant structure. Good work today.